I froze mid-bite, the silver fork trembling in my hand as the laughter erupted around the table. My son didn't stop them, he led them. She eats like an animal, he chuckled, eyes gleaming with cruelty I didn't recognize. The linen napkins, the polished glasses, the polished lies, they all blurred as heat crawled up my neck. After packing his lunch boxes, after giving him the bigger slice, after raising him alone, I had become his punchline. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The steakhouse buzzed with low jazz and moneyed conversation, all dim lighting and flickering votives tucked into dark wood. Marjorie sat stiffly at the end of the table, her cloth napkin folded precisely across her lap, her steak cut into clean, even bites. She chewed slowly, not out of awkwardness, but habit. 40 years of dining alone had made her careful, not sloppy. Across the table, Stephanie's friends sipped from rimmed glasses of overpriced Malbec and flirted lazily with the waiter, basking in their curated dinner scene. Everyone wore a shine, a gloss, except Marjorie, whose blouse was pressed but plain, and whose hair was pulled back in its usual quiet bun. That's when Kyle leaned forward, fork dangling between his fingers, and grinned. "She eats like an animal," he said, loud enough for the next table to hear. The laughter came instantly, reflexive and sharp. Stephanie let out a thin chuckle, then masked it with a sip of wine. One of her friends slapped the table with her manicured hand and wheezed as if it were the funniest thing she'd heard all week. Marjorie froze. The steak sat half-chewed in her mouth, but she couldn't swallow. Her eyes flicked up, first to Kyle, who looked smug and satisfied, and then to Stephanie, whose smile curled smugly at the corner like smoke. No apology, no shock. No one even pretended to be embarrassed for her. Marjorie set her fork and knife down quietly on the plate, aligning them side by side. Her fingers moved with the same precision she'd once used when shelving reference books at the public library. Her gaze didn't break. She wasn't going to give them the pleasure of seeing her flinch. She dabbed at her lips with her napkin, folded it with care, and placed it atop her plate. "I think I'll step out for some air," she said softly. Nobody objected. Kyle didn't offer to join her. Stephanie leaned in to whisper something to her friend, lips already curled in private amusement. It wasn't just an insult, it was dismissal. A public one. The host gave her a polite nod as she passed, but she didn't respond. Outside, the parking lot was quiet and cool. The Oklahoma air brushed with the scent of autumn leaves and something faintly metallic from the nearby street. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she walked toward her car. Not rushed, not rattled, just precise. She unlocked the door, rested her palm against the roof of her old sedan, and let the silence settle around her. The windows of the restaurant glowed warm behind her, and she imagined Kyle back at the table, probably retelling some real estate story that ended with a 6-figure commission. All charm, all show. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and scrolled to a name she hadn't called in weeks, but thought about often. Lydia Grant. She pressed the call button. It rang once. "Marge?" Lydia's voice crackled through the speaker. "You out late?" "He humiliated me," Marjorie said, her voice level, loudly, in front of her friends. "Called me an animal for how I eat." Lydia went quiet for a beat. "You want me to come get you?" "No, I'm in my car. I just needed someone to know it happened." Her voice didn't tremble. That surprised her. "What did you do?" "I said nothing. I left." She paused. "And I remembered something." "What's that?" Marjorie looked down at her hands that had once packed his school lunches, written rent checks she could barely afford, and carried boxes alone when they moved after Richard died. "I remembered whose table he sat at for 40 years. Mine." Lydia gave a low whistle. "Well," she said, voice steel-edged, "sounds like the boy just lost his seat." Marjorie ended the call, started her car, and drove off into the night. She didn't look back. Lydia stood on the porch, hair swept into a tight gray braid, eyes sharper than the early morning chill. Her coat flared open like a cape in the wind as she held out the pie with one hand and a steaming thermos of black coffee with the other. "You look like hell," she said, stepping past Marjorie before being invited in. "Figured you'd be up." Marjorie managed a tired smile, her robe cinched tight, slippers soft against the hardwood. "You brought pie. You don't need comfort food. You need sugar and strategy." Lydia swept into the kitchen, setting the pie down like it was Exhibit A. "So, tell me what the golden boy did." They sat at the breakfast table, the one Marjorie had polished weekly for decades. Outside, Tulsa was still wrapped in quiet fog, the kind that blurred the world into soft shadows. Inside, the silence felt sharp, punctuated only by the hiss of the coffee maker and Lydia's tapping fingers. Marjorie stared at her hands. He said, "I eat like an animal." In front of a table full of strangers? Loudly, Lydia didn't blink. "And?" "They laughed." Stephanie smirked. Not a single person said a thing. Lydia inhaled sharply through her nose and pushed back from the table like she might need to throw a punch. 40 damn years. You clothed him, fed him, paid off his damn braces when Richard died. I know. No, Marge, you don't. Because if you knew, you wouldn't still have him sitting on your will like a vulture waiting for your bones. Marjorie didn't answer. Instead, she stood, walked slowly to the hall closet, and returned with a leather binder, green, worn at the edges, the kind banks used to give out before everything went digital. She laid it on the table and opened it with a practiced hand. Will's property deeds, bank account breakdowns, insurance. Every detail, tabbed and dated. Kyle's name sat on line after line. Beneficiary, sole heir. Lydia squinted at the pages, then snapped the binder shut. "So he humiliates you over dinner, and you're planning to leave him the house you were pregnant in?" Marjorie's voice was quiet. "I haven't touched it since 2017. "Well, it's 2025, honey. And this boy's out here mocking you like you're some stray he picked up off the street." Lydia leaned in, her voice dropping to a razor whisper. "Why not feed him something different?" Something cold. Marjorie looked up. "What do you mean?" "Cut him off legally. Rework the estate. Make him earn it in court if he thinks he's entitled to a damn cent." Lydia's fingers tapped the binder like a gavel. "He wants to humiliate you in public. Let's see how he handles the spotlight from a witness stand." The idea didn't shock Marjorie. That surprised her. She sat with it for a long moment, watching a patch of sunlight crawl up the fridge. She'd spent her life avoiding conflict. But this wasn't about conflict. It was about dignity. The dignity of a mother who'd been disrespected too many times in too many quiet ways. She reached for her phone. Lydia raised an eyebrow. "You calling who I think you're calling?" "Daniel Mercer," Marjorie replied, fingers already dialing. "He handled Richard's estate. He'll know what to do." The line rang twice, and then a familiar voice picked up, dry, direct, just as she remembered. "Daniel Mercer speaking." Marjorie exhaled slowly. "Daniel, it's Marjorie Henson. I'd like to schedule a meeting." "To amend my estate." Lydia leaned back in her chair, arms folded, smiling like someone who just witnessed the first shot in a long overdue war. Marjorie hung up and looked down at the binder. She wasn't just updating documents. She was setting the table for a reckoning. The walls of Daniel Mercer's office hadn't changed in decades. Deep walnut paneling, antique brass sconces, law books arranged like trophies behind glass. It smelled faintly of old paper, floor polish, and something more clinical, precision. Marjorie sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, estate binder perched on the edge of the polished desk. Across from her, Daniel reviewed it without rushing, his silver-framed glasses sliding down his nose as he flipped through each tab section. "So," he said finally, closing the binder with a soft thud, "you're ready to stop treating your son like a beneficiary and start treating him like a litigant." Marjorie didn't smile. He made his choice in public, I'll make mine on paper. Daniel steepled his fingers, leaning back in the leather chair that groaned slightly under the shift. You know this won't be neat. Protective trusts, conditional clauses, executor appointments. It's not the kind of paperwork you just sign and forget. Especially not with a son like Kyle. He doesn't call me unless he wants something, she replied. Now I want something. Lydia, seated beside her, crossed one leg over the other, boot tapping against the wood floor. And I'm here to make sure she gets it. Daniel glanced at Lydia, a wry half-smile playing at his lips. Still bulldozing through stubborn men, I see. Only the entitled ones, she shot back. And this one's overdue for a lesson. Daniel turned serious again. Here's what we can do. Restructure everything into a protective, living trust. You retain full control while you're alive. Upon death, distribution becomes discretionary. Kyle will have to meet conditions, if you choose to give him any share at all. Marjorie nodded, processing. And if I don't want Stephanie touching a dime? We exclude her by name, Daniel said, explicitly. That's enforceable, Lydia leaned forward. And if Kyle tries to contest it, he'll have to make his case in probate court. Burden of proof is on him, which, given his behavior, won't be an easy sell. Marjorie's fingers tapped lightly on the edge of her teacup. She could hear the rain starting up against the window behind her, soft at first, then heavier, like it had been waiting for this moment to pour. What if I don't want him deciding how anything gets handled? I don't trust him. Daniel pulled out a form from his drawer. You appoint an executor, someone who understands what you want and will enforce it without flinching. Lydia spoke without hesitation. Me. I'll do it. Daniel's eyes flicked up from the page. You understand the responsibility? I'm retired and have time. Plus, I've got the spine. She turned to Marjorie. You trust me. With everything, Marjorie said quietly. The room held a stillness after that, something heavier than silence. A shift, quiet but irreversible. Daniel began drafting the First Amendment. We'll need to document the reasons for the change. Not all of them, but enough to hold up if challenged. I'd suggest contemporaneous notes, maybe even a journal entry. Anything to show intent. Marjorie reached into her purse and pulled out a single folded napkin. The one from the steakhouse, creased and stained with the memory of that dinner. She placed it gently on the desk. Start with that. Daniel stared at it for a moment, then picked up his pen. The rain outside became a steady percussion against the window pane. Marjorie watched him write, her heartbeat slow and steady for the first time in days. After a few minutes, Daniel looked up. One more question before we go deeper. Marjorie raised an eyebrow. He leaned forward, voice calm and deliberate. Would you like to make him prove in court why he deserves anything at all? A long silence followed. Then softly, without hesitation, Marjorie said, Yes. The pen slid across the page with a whisper, its black ink curling into finality. Marjorie's signature was firm, decisive. Daniel Mercer watched closely as she signed the last amendment to the trust, then turned the page with reverence, like a surgeon prepping for one final stitch. You understand the implications, he said, voice steady but laced with gravity. Once I notarize this, it's done. It's enforceable. No do-overs. I wouldn't sign it if I wanted one, Marjorie replied. Daniel nodded once, then opened the leather-bound notary journal with the precision of someone who'd dismantled hundreds of family legacies and rebuilt only the few that deserved it. He stamped each document cleanly. No smudges, no hesitation. Lydia, seated beside Marjorie, leaned in with her phone and snapped a photo of the moment. Smile, she said with mock sweetness. This is the day you stopped being their doormat. Marjorie didn't smile, but her chin lifted slightly, the corners of her mouth settling into a quiet line of pride. She looked at the neat stack of documents, amendments that cut Kyle's guaranteed inheritance off at the knees, and named Lydia as executor with full authority. Stephanie would get nothing, not a cent, not a spoon. Daniel tucked the papers into a locked briefcase. I'll file everything formally on Monday. In the meantime, Kyle is still unaware. We hold that card close. Outside the window, Tulsa's downtown shimmered with morning light, the streets slowly waking up with delivery trucks and dog walkers. Marjorie had parked in the back lot deliberately. She didn't want to risk anyone recognizing her car. Not that her son would bother checking, but still. They left the office in silence, Lydia walking in stride with her, not behind. The brisk air cut across their faces as they crossed the sidewalk, the wind tasting faintly of distant barbecue and burned coffee. Marjorie didn't flinch. She had decided to be done flinching. Later that afternoon, at home, she opened her phone and made the mistake of checking Instagram. Stephanie had posted a carousel from the steakhouse. Photos of their group laughing, sipping wine, slicing into ribeyes like everything was perfect. In one photo, Kyle had his arm slung around Stephanie's shoulder, grinning wide. Caption: Family night out. Grateful for good people, good wine, and endless laughs. No mention of Marjorie. No trace of the insult. The table was framed without her in it, cropped out as though she'd never existed. Marjorie stared at the screen for a long time. Her thumb didn't scroll. Her face didn't move. The silence in the room buzzed with quiet betrayal. She set the phone down and stood. There was one more thing she needed to do. She drove to the senior center, a modest brick building nestled between a laundromat and a diner that still served breakfast until noon. Her trunk was filled with 2 boxes, books she and Richard had collected over the years. First editions, out-of-print mysteries, rare Civil War volumes. Every title dusted and cataloged. When she walked into the donation office, the receptionist looked up. "These all yours?" "They were my husband's," Marjorie said softly, placing one box on the counter. "He was a good man. He believed books belonged to the living, not the locked up." The woman smiled. "We'll make sure they get good homes." Marjorie lingered just a moment longer before nodding and stepping back into the wind. The sun had dipped behind the clouds, casting the parking lot in a soft blue-gray hue. She breathed it in like medicine. She was no longer waiting for gratitude. She was building legacy on her own terms. That evening, Lydia called but didn't ask how she was. She didn't need to. Instead, they spoke of logistics, timelines, next steps, what would happen when Kyle found out, and how Daniel would control the narrative in court. Then, just past 6:30, Marjorie's phone buzzed again. Daniel Mercer. She answered on the first ring. "Marjorie," he said, tone cool and clipped. "Everything's processed. The trust is locked. The documents are filed." She said nothing, but her pulse ticked a little louder. "We'll be serving Kyle notice next week," Daniel added. "Make sure you're ready for the fallout." Marjorie stepped to the window, watching a neighbor walk their dog across the street. "I've been ready for 40 years, she said. The envelope was thick, official, and embossed with a seal Kyle had only seen once before, in the weeks after his father's death. Now it had his name on it, and this time it wasn't delivering money. It was taking it away. Kyle flipped the envelope over for the 3rd time, as if the contents might change if he stared long enough. "Certified mail, legal notice," was stamped in bold red ink on the front. His assistant had handed it to him just after his morning call with a hedge fund buyer, looking nervous. She'd said, "It's from an estate attorney," like she expected a bomb to go off. It did, quietly. He slit the envelope open with the silver letter opener he kept on his desk, more for show than utility. Inside were 6 pages, neatly tabbed and watermarked, bearing the unmistakable signature of Daniel Mercer. As he scanned the first paragraph, his jaw tightened. "Marjorie Ann Henson, grantor, has restructured her estate into an irrevocable protective trust. Your status as a beneficiary is no longer guaranteed. Your access to inheritance is conditional and subject to court review." "What the hell?" Kyle muttered, flipping pages in a panic. Stephanie strolled into the office with a cold brew in hand and sunglasses still perched on her head. Despite the fact they were indoors, "What's that?" she asked, glancing at the papers. He didn't answer. His eyes were darting between sections, each one worse than the last. Lydia Grant was listed as the executor. Stephanie was specifically excluded from the estate. There were conditions, restrictions, language that screamed, "You're not trusted." She reached over, pulled a page toward her. "Oh," she said after a few seconds. "She's really doing it." Kyle slammed the packet down on the desk. "She wouldn't dare." Stephanie raised an eyebrow. "She already did." He shot up from his chair, grabbing his keys off the credenza. "I'm going over there." Stephanie followed him halfway down the hallway. "It's a bluff," she called after him. "She's probably just mad. Ride it out. Don't give her the reaction she wants." But Kyle wasn't listening. The door slammed behind him. Marjorie heard the tires crunch across the gravel driveway before she saw the black Lexus screech to a halt outside her front window. The rhythm of her day hadn't changed. She was still in her house coat, folding laundry at the kitchen table while a kettle hissed gently behind her. The air inside was warm with the scent of lemon cleaner and starch. The knock on the door wasn't polite. It was 3 quick, angry pounds. She answered slowly, towel still in hand. Kyle stormed inside without waiting for an invitation. "What the hell is this?" he barked, waving the documents like a weapon. "You put your estate in a trust? You cut me out?" Marjorie moved past him calmly, into the kitchen. "Coffee?" she asked, as if he'd just dropped by for a chat. "Are you out of your mind?" he snapped. She reached for a second cup, poured slowly, carefully. "Cream and sugar still?" he scoffed. "You think this is funny? You can't do this. I'm your son." She placed the mug on the counter and turned to face him fully. Her voice was even, cool. "Sons don't laugh while their mothers are humiliated at dinner tables." The words hit harder than the papers had. For a moment, Kyle said nothing. "You're seriously going to make me fight you in court?" he said finally. "Over this?" Marjorie didn't flinch. "No. I'm going to make you explain to a judge why you deserve anything at all." The front door creaked open again, this time with deliberate force. Daniel Mercer stepped inside, followed by a uniformed sheriff. He held a manila envelope and a clipboard. "Mr. Henson," Daniel said, voice clipped. "Per statutory requirement, I'm serving you with formal notice of contest proceedings. You are now legally required to appear in court and prove financial entitlement to your mother's estate. And until this matter is resolved, you are not authorized to make any claim or representation about her assets." Kyle blinked. "You brought a cop?" "Standard civil protocol for delivery under high conflict risk," Daniel replied, handing the clipboard to the sheriff. The officer extended it toward Kyle. "Need your signature, sir." Kyle stared between them, his mother, her lawyer, a sheriff, and for the first time in years, looked genuinely unsure of himself. Outside, the Lexus idled, forgotten. The parking garage under Kyle's downtown office echoed with tension. Engines revved in the distance, someone's radio thumped low bass, but inside the SUV, it was dead quiet, except for the rustle of paper and Stephanie's low, venom-laced voice. "This is unbelievable," she said, flicking to the 3rd page of the court notice. "She's actually going through with it." Kyle's hands were rigid on the wheel, his jaw flexed. "She thinks she's smarter than me. She thinks hiring a fossil with a briefcase makes her bulletproof." Stephanie tilted her head. "Well, Mercer is good. This is airtight. She didn't just cut you out. She set you up to look greedy if you fight back." Kyle snatched the papers from her lap and scanned them again. Conditional access, pending judicial review, and Lydia as executor. His voice rose. "This woman used to bring me Halloween candy. Now she's playing executioner?" Stephanie rolled her eyes. "You embarrassed your mother in front of everyone. This is theater, Kyle." She's staging her comeback outside the SUV. The world moved on. But inside, Stephanie leaned closer, her voice low and sharp. "We don't need to beat her in court. We just need to beat her in public." Marjorie sat across from Daniel Mercer in his office again, her estate binder open, a legal pad in front of her. Lydia was perched beside her, glasses down on her nose, scribbling notes in her tight, practiced handwriting. Daniel sipped black coffee from a ceramic mug that read "Disinherit the Entitled" in small type. This hearing, Daniel explained, will determine the enforceability of the trust. Kyle's legal team will try to prove coercion, diminished capacity, or undue influence. That's their only play. He filed, Lydia asked, not surprised. Daniel nodded, sliding a copy of the petition across the desk. Claiming elder coercion. Says you were manipulated by an outside party. That would be you. Lydia gave a short laugh. Coercion? She barely coerces her cat. The only thing she pressures is a lemon over fish. Marjorie said nothing. She just glanced down at the page with her son's name at the top. Kyle Anthony Henson, petitioner. Seeing it in legal print didn't sting like she expected. It felt clarifying. This wasn't her son anymore. This was a man demanding to be paid for his disrespect. Daniel continued. The judge will want to see consistency, long-standing intentions, clear mental competency, and independent legal counsel. You've given me all three. We just need to present it calmly. Lydia closed her notepad. Good. Because he's about to turn this into a circus. And he did. It started the next morning. At the corner bakery Marjorie had visited for 20 years, she noticed the shift. The barista's smile was tight. The woman in line behind her whispered something after she ordered. On the community board near the register, someone had scribbled, "Watch your wills," next to a flyer for estate planning services. At the grocery store, it was worse. Mrs. Fallon, who used to chat about apples and coupons, now eyed her cart like it held weapons instead of canned soup. Whispers trailed her through aisles like cobwebs. Stephanie had struck first. By the time Lydia showed up with backup groceries and a bottle of wine, the rumor mill was already halfway through its spin cycle. They're saying you've lost it, Lydia reported, handing over a brown paper bag. Said I manipulated you, that you're giving all your money to a cat rescue or a cult. Marjorie raised an eyebrow. I don't even like cats. I know, Lydia said. That's what makes it so good, Daniel called later that night to confirm. They're playing a long game, he warned, trying to undermine you socially before they fail legally. Marjorie stood at the sink, staring out at her quiet street. Porch lights flickered on one by one. Fall leaves were starting to line the curb. I'm not interested in popularity, she said. I'm interested in peace. But peace would have to wait. Back in their SUV, parked outside their condo tower, Stephanie scrolled through her phone with a practiced sneer. Local buzz is spreading. Poor old woman manipulated by her bitter friend. People eat that up. Kyle's fingers drummed the steering wheel. None of it matters if we lose in court. Stephanie looked up, eyes hard. Then we don't lose. We drag her through public mud until she quits. The rumors started at a nail salon, according to Lydia. Stephanie had been venting to a stylist, loud enough for every drying table to hear. She's not well anymore, Stephanie had said with a sigh, flipping her designer bag closed. She's confused, keeps mixing up names. Kyle's worried. It's sad, really, by the end of the week, confused had turned into unstable. Then unstable became unfit. The word dementia started making rounds without a single doctor's note to support it. At the grocery store, Marjorie felt the shift. The cashier who once complimented her quilting pins now smiled too brightly, spoke too slowly. A young couple in the dairy aisle fell silent as she reached for a half-gallon of milk, suddenly fascinated by the yogurt shelf. Even Mrs. Darrow from 2 doors down, who'd borrowed sugar from Marjorie 3 times this year, pretended not to see her by the frozen peas. She said nothing. Instead, she picked out tulips, Richard's favorite, yellow and simple, like the ones he used to plant along the backyard fence. She paid an exact change, folded the receipt, and left without looking back. The next morning, she walked to Oakwood Cemetery alone, coat buttoned against the wind, and placed the flowers gently at the foot of the modest granite headstone that bore her husband's name. The ground was damp, the sky low and gray. "I'm fine," she said aloud, her voice steady. "I remember everything." She stayed there until her fingers went cold. Back at her house, Lydia was already in the kitchen, unpacking groceries and blasting Motown from a Bluetooth speaker. Like the house needed shaking loose. I picked the loudest bagger at Market 1, just to make sure they heard me say, "She's sharper than anyone I know," Lydia said, unbothered. "Also, I got snacks." Marjorie chuckled faintly, slipping off her gloves. "They think I've lost it." "They hope you've lost it," Lydia corrected. "Big difference." Marjorie sank into her usual spot at the kitchen table. "It's exhausting. Having to prove you're not unraveling just because people decide it's more convenient to believe you are." "That's why Daniel's setting up the evaluation," Lydia said, sliding a folder toward her. "Psychiatric capacity exam. By a third-party specialist, one of the best in the state. Unbiased, objective, airtight." Marjorie looked at the folder but didn't touch it yet. "I haven't needed a doctor to tell me I'm fine," she said. Lydia softened. "No, but the court might. And this isn't about your truth. It's about sealing every crack they'll try to pry open." The test was scheduled for the following Monday. It took place in a quiet office north of downtown. The walls were painted a soft, calming blue. A neutral-toned waiting room. No clocks, no distractions. The psychiatrist, a composed woman in her 40s with warm eyes and a sharp mind, ran Marjorie through every task with quiet precision. Memory recall, problem-solving, orientation, logical reasoning, emotional evaluation. When asked to recount her current legal situation, Marjorie gave a detailed summary without flinching. When asked if she knew who was challenging her estate, she didn't hesitate. "Kyle Henson," she said calmly. "My son. Born May 12th, 1985. He wants what he hasn't earned." The evaluator nodded, made a note, and moved on. 2 days later, the report arrived at Daniel Mercer's office. Lydia picked up a copy in person, dropped it on Marjorie's kitchen table, and grinned. "Passed with flying colors," she announced. "Cognitive function, judgment, memory, orientation, all top tier. They even put in writing that you show no signs of impairment, psychological or neurological." Marjorie exhaled. "Good." That's one more door closed to them, but the door they kicked open next was worse. That night Daniel called. His voice wasn't urgent, but it was edged. "Kyle just filed a new motion," he said. Marjorie's eyes narrowed. "What now?" "He's petitioning for full access to your financial records. Banking history, retirement accounts, insurance policies. Says he's concerned you're being manipulated into mismanaging your money." Marjorie set her tea down without sipping it. The china clinked against the saucer like a clock counting down. "They can't win in court," she said. Daniel replied, "No. But now they want to win in exposure." Marjorie sat upright in the walnut-paneled courtroom, her spine as straight as the wooden bench beneath her. Daniel Mercer was at her left, calm and clinical, every document stacked with surgical precision. Lydia flanked her right, eyes sharp behind her tortoiseshell frames, tapping her pen once for each minute Kyle was late. He did finally arrive, 5 minutes after the judge entered, wearing a blazer too tight in the shoulders and arrogance like cologne. Stephanie trailed behind, her outfit flawless, but her expression tight with calculation. She scanned the room like she was scoping a cocktail party for allies, not a courtroom for liability. The hearing was small, close to press, but open enough to feel public. A few city officials sat in the gallery. 2 attorneys for Kyle, 1 court clerk, and the judge, Honorable Rebecca Sloan, early 60s. No nonsense. Lipstick matte and gavel worn smooth from use. "Today's motion concerns Mr. Henson's petition to review his mother's financial records," Judge Sloan began, tone clipped. "Partial access granted. Scope limited to 5 years. Presented only under the supervision of a state counsel." Kyle leaned back, smug. Stephanie crossed her legs like she was watching a fashion segment. Then Daniel stood. He opened a leather binder with the solemnity of a man revealing a vault. Exhibit A, he said. 5 years of bank records, categorized, labeled, balanced to the penny, joint and individual accounts, no anomalies, no withdrawals inconsistent with routine living expenses. He placed the summary ledger on the table with a soft thwack that somehow echoed. Exhibit B, retirement portfolios, diversified, no loans taken, no suspicious activity. Each withdrawal is annotated with date, reason, and verification. Daniel moved with quiet, devastating certainty, turning each page like he was turning screws into Kyle's credibility. Exhibit C, donations, consistent and documented. No large or erratic gifts, all within legal gifting limits. He paused, then delivered the final blow. And a notarized third-party evaluation of Ms. Henson's estate management capabilities, deemed not only sufficient, but exemplary. Stephanie's arms dropped from their crossed position. Kyle shifted in his seat, trying and failing to smirk. Judge Sloan flipped through the exhibits with interest, eyes narrowing. Mr. Henson, do you or your counsel wish to present counter-evidence? Kyle's attorney, young, polished, clearly not prepared for Mercer's precision, stammered, Your Honor, we were operating under the assumption there might be mismanagement. Sloan looked up slowly. But you didn't confirm that before filing a motion accusing your mother of financial misconduct? Well, no, but you wasted this court's time. Her gavel rapped sharply once. Next baseless claim will be met with sanctions. Stephanie's legs stopped bouncing. Kyle flushed, his mouth tightening, but he said nothing. From the gallery, Lydia leaned over to Marjorie and whispered, Strike one. Marjorie didn't smile, but her shoulders eased, just slightly. Her hands rested quietly on her lap, not clenched like they had been during the first 2 hearings. When the judge dismissed them for recess, Kyle was the first to leave. He didn't even glance at his mother. Stephanie hesitated at the door, her expression unreadable, then followed him out. Daniel packed up the exhibits slowly, methodically. They'll pivot to emotional leverage next, he said. Prepare for theatrics. But the facts are on our side. Lydia reached for her coat. Let them flail. Marjorie stood and walked with grace toward the hallway, past the bailiff, past the clerk, past the 2 attorneys still mumbling about damage control. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and waxed tile. Just as she reached for the door to the elevator lobby, a voice stopped her. Excuse me. Miss Henson? Marjorie turned. A young woman with a press badge and a quiet confidence stepped forward. Dark blazer, messenger bag, press ID clipped to her lanyard. My name's Claire Nolan, she said, extending a hand. I'm with Tulsa Living. I've been following your case, quietly. I think your story matters. Marjorie hesitated. You're a reporter. I'm a storyteller, Claire replied. And what you're doing, fighting back with grace, with intelligence. Women don't get seen for that enough. I'd like to change that. Marjorie looked past her, through the tall lobby windows, where Kyle and Stephanie were arguing on the courthouse steps. Then she turned back to Claire. You want to tell my story? Claire smiled. If you'll let me. The sunlight cut in slanted beams through the sheer curtains of Marjorie's quilting room, illuminating floating dust and half-finished patchwork. Fabric scraps were stacked neatly along the window ledge, their colors soft and faded, much like the decades that had passed since she first threaded a needle in this space. Claire Nolan sat across from her, voice recorder balanced on a notepad, hands still and respectful. The young journalist hadn't taken a single picture yet, hadn't interrupted once. She didn't ask invasive questions. She let Marjorie decide the pace, but that didn't make it easier. I don't want to be pitied, Marjorie said finally, her voice low but clear. That's not why I agreed. Claire nodded. I don't write pity pieces. This is about dignity, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that sits at the back of the room and still changes everything. Marjorie looked down at her hands, at the calluses no one ever noticed. It started long before the steakhouse. Tell me, Claire said gently, So Marjorie did. She spoke about Kyle's early years, the scraped knees, the solo parent-teacher conferences, the Christmas mornings she made feel magical on a librarian's salary. She talked about Richard's cancer and the long, slow goodbye that left her navigating life, with one hand always reaching backward for a man who wasn't there. I didn't spoil Kyle, she said. I prepared him. Or thought I did. But somewhere along the line, he started believing he deserved applause for simply showing up. Claire scribbled notes, mostly listening. And when did that shift from disappointment to action? Marjorie looked out the window. The night he humiliated me over dinner, I realized he didn't just forget who raised him. He stopped thinking I was a person. There was a silence then, heavy but whole. Claire eventually stood, slow and respectful. You've given me more than enough. I'll send you a draft before anything prints. You can approve every line. I'm not here to spin. I'm here to preserve. Marjorie walked her to the door, then lingered by the screen after it shut, listening to the gravel crunch under Claire's heels. The silence that followed was oddly comforting, like something had been lifted, not exhaled, but excavated. 2 days later, Kyle found the draft. He hadn't been looking for it, but Stephanie left her tablet unlocked on the kitchen counter. She'd saved the article link in a folder labeled PR-MOM. He clicked out of boredom, then stood frozen for nearly 10 minutes as he read the headline. Dignity deferred, how one mother reclaimed her voice in court. His name appeared 7 times, never flattering. Words like entitled, dismissive, exploitative. Claire had done her homework. There were no direct quotes from Marjorie that made her sound bitter, just factual, quietly damning. When Stephanie walked in and saw his expression, her stomach dropped. She gave Claire the interview, Kyle said, voice raw. She made herself the victim. She is the victim, Stephanie replied carefully. He snapped around. You're siding with her now? I'm saying, she said, slow and deliberate. If she controls the narrative, we lose. Public opinion isn't about truth. It's about who gets heard first. And she just won that round. Kyle clenched his fists, pacing the kitchen. Then we drown it out. Stephanie crossed her arms. With what? More gossip? You already accused her of being senile and mismanaging funds. The court shut that down. We're out of angles. No, he said, eyes narrowing. There's one angle left. Legacy. She's still got those heirlooms. Dad's tools, the silverware, that old military watch from her grandfather. If I can't touch her trust, maybe I liquidate what I can before she buries me in sentiment. Stephanie froze. You're not seriously thinking. I am, he growled, and I don't need your approval. That night, in the dim light of the garage, Kyle took photos, up-close shots of Marjorie's antique silver, her vintage quilt rack, even the brass frame of Richard's war medals. Each one was uploaded to a seller's forum under a fake name. He didn't hear the car pull into the driveway. He didn't see Lydia step into the garage doorway. But he did hear her voice, cool, unimpressed, and entirely unshaken. Well, well, she said, arms folded. Caught you staging your own little estate sale? Kyle turned, caught like a raccoon in a spotlight, and Lydia reached for her phone. The listing caught Lydia's eye before the description did. Antique hand tools, pristine, vintage, one of a kind. But it was the photo that stopped her. She zoomed in slowly, a worn handle, initials carved into the wood. R.H.R. She scrolled faster, pulse tightening. Another listing. Sterling silver flatware set, estate collection. Every piece laid out like evidence, polished and posed. She knew that dining room table. Marjorie's. The final listing sent a chill down her spine. World War II medal set, authentic, display-ready. Centered in the frame was Richard's Bronze Star. It hadn't been appraised in decades, but it had never, ever been for sale. Lydia stood abruptly, knocking over her glass of water. By 7 a.m., she was in Daniel Mercer's office with her tablet unlocked, jaw clenched. He's selling her life, she said. voice razor thin. He's stealing from the living. Daniel clicked through the listings one by one. His expression never changed, but his fingers moved faster. Storage. Unit, he muttered. These backgrounds. Concrete walls, plastic bins. He staged this. It's premeditated. He picked up his office line and gave a single command to his assistant. Emergency injunction. Probate theft. Get me a judge within the hour. It worked. By mid-morning, Daniel, Lydia, and a city sheriff stood in front of a metal storage unit under Kyle's name. Technically registered through a shell LLC he probably thought would protect him. It didn't. The lock popped with a quick twist of the master key. The door groaned upward. Inside, lit by a single overhead bulb, was a curated museum of Marjorie's legacy. Richard's military memorabilia displayed in velvet-lined trays, the silverware boxed in padded foam. Even her wedding china stacked with auction stickers already attached. Inventory everything, Daniel said to the officers. Chain of custody, photographs. Every item logged. Lydia didn't speak until she saw the family quilt rack. One Marjorie had made by hand the winter after Richard passed. That quilt took her 6 months, she murmured. She cried through half of it. She snapped a photo anyway. Let's bring it home. The courtroom was silent but heavy the next afternoon. The way it gets when even the air seems to know something irreversible is about to happen. Kyle didn't show. His lawyer did, tight-lipped, defensive, flanked by Stephanie in full PR mode. High-neck dress, hair pinned, face like stone. Judge Sloan didn't waste time. Storage unit contents have been returned. Items were improperly listed for sale. Mr. Henson was notified of today's hearing and chose not to appear. Miss Henson, you've requested further legal protection? Daniel stood, voice cool and crisp. Yes, Your Honor. We're filing a restraining order. Mr. Henson attempted to liquidate assets not legally his, in direct violation of estate boundaries. My client no longer feels safe. The judge turned to Stephanie. Did you know the items were being sold? I didn't realize they were hers, she replied, eyes darting. Kyle said they were old things from his childhood. He said his mother didn't want them. The courtroom stayed still. The lie hung in the air like perfume. Sweet, but unmistakably false. Judge Sloan didn't blink. You're listed as co-owner of the storage lease. That makes you a named participant. Whether by consent or negligence, Stephanie didn't respond. I'm granting the protective order, Sloan said. Kyle Henson is to remain 500 feet from Miss Henson's residence and may not remove, access, or claim any item affiliated with the estate. Any violation will escalate to criminal theft, the gavel hit. Quick, final. Marjorie never looked at Stephanie. She sat motionless in the front row of the gallery, hands folded over her handbag, spine tall. Her expression didn't gloat. It didn't mourn. It simply endured. When it ended, Lydia whispered, That's checkmate. But Marjorie shook her head softly. No, she murmured. This was just him tipping the king. That night, after the house had quieted, the fire had burned low, and her tea sat cold on the side table, Marjorie's phone buzzed once. Kyle Henson. You'll regret this, Mom. She stared at it. No reply, no fear. Just the quiet knowledge that some sons don't understand the weight of the name they sign. The house around her was still. The only sound came from the creak of the floorboards as she walked to the kitchen and set her phone gently on the table. Lydia arrived before sunrise with her coat still buttoned, a travel mug in one hand and her jaw set like concrete. She didn't need caffeine. She needed momentum. You saved the message? She asked, flipping open her notepad before even sitting down. Marjorie slid the phone across the table. I haven't replied. I won't, Lydia nodded. Good. We don't fight trash fires with gasoline. She snapped a photo of the screen. We fight it with legal fireproofing. An hour later, they were seated in Daniel Mercer's office. The lawyer read the text once, his mouth a hard line. He's escalating. Classic panic behavior. Marjorie folded her hands. He wanted to scare me. Daniel opened a manila folder. He just gave me more ammunition instead. By mid-morning, Daniel had filed an addendum to the restraining order, a formal notice of intimidation, not a criminal charge, but a court-documented pattern of behavior. The record was growing, and Kyle had no idea how damning it was becoming. The next day's hearing was procedural, but charged. Kyle arrived alone this time, wearing a charcoal suit he didn't quite fill. He kept glancing toward the courtroom doors, but Stephanie never walked through them. Judge Sloan entered, and the room snapped to stillness. "We are here to address the most recent filing regarding Ms. Henson's protection," she said, her voice like gravel. "Mr. Henson, you were made aware of the restraining order's terms. You violated them. Whether or not your message qualifies as criminal intimidation, it shows disregard for court instruction." Kyle shifted, color rising in his face. "I wasn't threatening her," he said. "I was angry. Hurt. She cut me out. You humiliated her in public. You stole from her private estate. You attempted to liquidate assets, and now you're sending veiled threats?" Sloan shook her head. "I don't need a psychologist to call this coercion." "I see it clearly." His lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. "One more violation, and I will refer this case to the district attorney for harassment. Do I make myself clear?" Kyle muttered. "Yes, Your Honor." Behind him, the gallery was packed tighter than usual. Whispers had made their way through town, and curiosity had turned into scrutiny. Marjorie sat quietly, her composure a lighthouse in a courtroom storm. Claire Nolan, seated 2 rows back, made one final note before slipping out during recess. The article dropped that night. "Dignity on Trial, One Mother's Stand." The headline trended locally within hours. The accompanying photo, Marjorie in her quilting room, backlit by morning light, was quiet, powerful, not staged, just real. Claire's writing was clear-eyed and human, tracing Marjorie's story not through legal jargon, but through years of endurance. The sacrifices, the absence of Richard, the slow erosion of Kyle's respect, and finally, the decision that changed everything. She wrote, "This isn't a story of revenge. It's a story of self-respect, of what happens when silence becomes strength, and a mother decides she doesn't owe anyone the rest of herself just because she gave them her best years." Comments poured in. Hundreds. "You're not alone, Marjorie. This hit too close. My mom went through this. She didn't fight back. I wish she had. Thank you for showing us how." Letters arrived at Marjorie's doorstep. Emails to Daniel's office. Calls to the senior center. Marjorie didn't seek the attention, but she didn't run from it either. Lydia smiled over her coffee. "They thought they were dragging you down, but you rose." Stephanie's silence became its own signal. She stopped showing up to court, stopped tagging Kyle in her social media posts, stopped wearing her wedding ring. When Kyle returned home from a meeting with his now apathetic attorney, he found her closet half empty, a note on the counter beside her keys. It wasn't dramatic. "Kyle, this isn't who I married. This isn't who I want to be." Stephanie, she hadn't taken much, just her things, and the last illusion he had left. The call came in at 2:12 a.m. Kyle's name flashing across Marjorie's phone like a wound she hadn't picked at in weeks. She stared at it in the dark, the screen buzzing against the nightstand. She didn't answer, not this time. The voicemail was shaky, his voice unrecognizable in its softness. "Mom, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Everything's falling apart. I'm not the bad guy. You know that, right?" He paused. "I miss you." Click. Marjorie stared at the phone screen, her expression unreadable. The morning sun filtered weakly through the living room blinds, catching on the dust motes floating above her coffee table. She didn't replay the message. She didn't need to. In the kitchen, Lydia stood by the sink, skimming his earlier texts. "Same thing, different tone," she muttered, tossing the phone face down. One second he's furious, next he's wounded. But still no apology. "No acknowledgement of what he did," Marjorie said, placing her teacup down gently. Just regret that he lost control. Lydia didn't reply. She didn't need to. They both knew Kyle's voice wasn't rooted in repentance. It was drowning in consequence. The courthouse loomed closer. Daniel was in full trial mode. Spreadsheets, exhibits, and precedent cases spread across his desk like an intricate battle map. He'd even canceled his annual fly fishing weekend, which Lydia claimed was more telling than anything he'd filed. Everything's airtight, he said, flipping through pages. Financial records? Solid. Documentation of theft? Bulletproof? Witnesses? Verified. The intimidation text? The restraining order? Stephanie's departure? It's all forming a pattern. Marjorie sat across from him, her back straight, hands folded. I don't want to destroy him, she said softly. No, Daniel agreed. But you do want the court to recognize what he tried to do. That matters. 3 days before the hearing, Marjorie visited the local museum. The quilts were packed into 2 cedar-lined boxes, 5 of them, each stitched by hand over decades. She carried them herself, one by one, through the front doors and into the archive room, where the curator, a middle-aged woman with gentle hands, greeted her with quiet awe. These are extraordinary, the woman said, unfolding one carefully. Every stitch is perfectly clean. And the stories behind them. They're part of the house, Marjorie said, but not part of the fight. She didn't want Kyle dragging sentiment into the courtroom. Let the quilts tell their stories elsewhere, where they would be seen, respected, and preserved. Claire's article had already done its part. Dignity on Trial was now trending beyond Tulsa. It had reached syndicated regional columns, parenting forums, even a Sunday morning radio spot. The piece had legs, and Kyle's reputation didn't. Online, comment sections buzzed. Strangers were forming opinions, and few of them were sympathetic to him. Entitled Adult Children Need to Learn. Parents aren't retirement plans. This woman is all of us. I hope she wins everything. Someone give Marjorie a podcast and a lawyer cape. Even Stephanie, who once curated their life like an influencer curates a breakfast spread, was distancing herself. The formal separation paperwork was filed, stamped, and public. In the official statement released through her attorney, the line that cut deepest wasn't legal, it was personal. I no longer recognize the man I married. Kyle didn't read it twice. He barely got through it once. That night, Marjorie was in bed with a book when headlights swept across her bedroom wall. She blinked, sat up. The clock read 1:04 a.m. The car engine idled too long to be someone passing through. Then a door slammed, and a voice, ragged and loud, cut through the stillness. Mom, Kyle's voice slurred. You really gonna just leave me out here like garbage? Huh? After everything? She sat motionless, the book closed gently on her lap. Outside, he was stumbling across the lawn, shoes crunching on gravel, bottle in hand. You think this makes you noble? You think the whole town loving you means anything? You needed me. You still do. She didn't respond. He kicked at one of the garden lights, sending it skittering sideways. You think you're better than me now? Some media darling? You're not. You're nothing without Dad, and you always... The porch light snapped on. Lydia stood at the door. Her voice didn't rise, but it sliced through the chaos. You need to leave, Kyle. Right now he turned, eyes bloodshot. Or what? She held up her phone. Or the cops get the live feed of your spiral. With audio, he hesitated, then laughed bitterly. You're bluffing. The sirens in the distance disagreed. Lydia didn't flinch. Inside, Marjorie finally stood and walked to the window, watching the blue lights rise behind the hedges. The court date was near, and Kyle had just made his entrance unforgettable. Kyle walked into the courtroom looking like the closing arguments of his own life. Shirt wrinkled, eyes hollow, collar askew. He wasn't dressed for redemption. He was dressed for reckoning. The gallery murmured with a quiet buzz, attorneys adjusting folders, a journalist scribbling in shorthand, spectators whispering low. But all of it faded when Marjorie stepped inside. She wore navy, ironed smooth, hair pinned back with the same silver clip she'd worn to Richard's funeral. There was no anger in her face, just clarity. Lydia walked beside her, shoulders squared, heels clicking with purpose. When they reached their seats, Lydia leaned in and whispered, "You breathe." "I'll stare him down," Marjorie exhaled and folded her hands. Judge Sloane entered with her usual economy of motion, black robes trailing behind her like a shadow that didn't make excuses. She took her seat without preamble and scanned the docket. Case Henson versus Henson motion to disqualify heir status, enforce protective trust, and determine sanctions. Kyle stood at his table. Even from the gallery, the damage showed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't believed consequences would ever reach him. His tie was loose, his skin pale. Stephanie, notably absent. Daniel Mercer rose like a man lighting a fuse. "Your Honor," he began, voice calm. "Today we ask not for vengeance, but for protection. My client, Marjorie Henson, spent 4 decades raising a son who now seeks to undo everything she built. Not from love, but entitlement. He presented documents, property records, the trust language, the restraining order. Mr. Henson has already attempted to illegally sell heirlooms belonging to the estate. He has violated a protective order. He has used manipulation, intimidation, and public shaming tactics in an effort to claim what is no longer his." Kyle's lawyer interrupted, citing emotional strain, family misunderstanding, and reactionary behavior. But the weight of the exhibits made those phrases sound like excuses shouted into a canyon. Daniel's final exhibit was a photo. Richard's war medals in a plastic bin, listed online for profit. He turned to Kyle. "Did you ask your mother before offering these to strangers?" Kyle looked down, said nothing. "Did you list items she made with her own hands, quilts, tools, china?" Still silence. Judge Sloane's expression didn't change, but her pen stopped moving. That was louder than any gavel. Then it was Marjorie's turn. She stood slowly, walked to the witness chair, and faced the courtroom. "My son believes inheritance is owed," she said, "but inheritance is not currency. It's trust," and he broke that her voice didn't tremble. "I taught him to be kind. I taught him to share. I taught him that silence is not weakness. And now I'm showing him that silence can also be power." When she finished, there was no applause. Just the deep, respectful quiet of a room that knew it had seen something unshakable. The judge called for a brief recess. Marjorie returned to her seat. Lydia reached over, gripping her hand without a word. 15 minutes later, the court reconvened. Judge Sloane didn't waste time. "This court finds sufficient cause to uphold the protective trust in full. Mr. Kyle Henson is officially and permanently disinherited." Kyle shifted, opened his mouth, but no words came. The judge continued. "Further, this court recognizes a consistent pattern of bad faith conduct, unauthorized asset handling, attempted coercion, and violation of protective orders." Daniel's eyes flicked upward, sensing something beyond what they'd asked for. "In light of this conduct," Sloane said, "I am issuing financial sanctions. Mr. Henson is hereby ordered to cover all legal fees incurred by the respondent, including attorney retainers, filing, costs, and investigative expenses." Gasps echoed in the back row. Kyle turned a shade paler. He stammered, "Wait, what?" "I can't—" "Not another word, Mr. Henson," the judge snapped. "Court is adjourned." The gavel hit. Final. Marjorie didn't move at first. Then she rose with quiet grace, collected her bag, and nodded once to Daniel. Lydia exhaled beside her like she'd just won a war she hadn't expected to survive. In the hallway, the doors swung open behind them. Kyle staggered out, disoriented, voice shaking. "This isn't over. You hear me?" he barked. "She'll pay for this." Daniel stepped between them, calm but steel-spined. "No, Kyle. You'll pay for this." In monthly installments, Marjorie didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She'd already written the verdict, and this time the ink wouldn't fade. The numbers weren't just typed, they were carved. Black ink, cold and merciless. $38,462.19 in legal fees, payable in full. Kyle blinked at the document, but the numbers didn't change. He was officially in debt to the woman he'd spent months trying to humiliate. Outside the courthouse, the sky hung low and gray, like it knew what had just unfolded inside. Rain teased the pavement, not quite falling, but threatening to. Kyle sat on the stone bench near the front steps, head in his hands, elbows on his knees. His once-tailored blazer looked limp, as though it too had given up. He hadn't spoken since the ruling, not to his lawyer, not to the clerk, and certainly not to Stephanie, whose silence had grown louder by the day. He'd called her from the courthouse parking lot, voice raw, voicemail. He tried again, nothing. By the time the third attempt failed, he gave up. Inside his glove compartment sat her separation paperwork, signed, notarized, final. Stephanie had taken her name off everything. No joint bank accounts, no shared cards, no comment to the press. When the sanctions hit, she sent a one-line message: "Do not contact me for money." I warned you the court had ruled wage garnishment, 25% of his net income, every month until the balance was paid. That meant no upgrades, no getaways, no luxuries, just a slow bleed. Kyle didn't go back to the office. He couldn't. The receptionist had already whispered to another agent the week prior. His mom's the one in that article, right? He couldn't stomach the smirks anymore. Marjorie stepped into the cool courthouse air with a quiet elegance that silenced even the wind. She wore her mother's brooch and carried no umbrella. She didn't need one. Lydia was beside her, holding a navy parasol like a sword on standby. A camera clicked. Claire stood 10 feet away, her lens lowered, her presence respectful. She didn't shove, she didn't shout, just one question. "How are you feeling, Marjorie?" Marjorie paused, straightened her coat, then walked forward, chin high, the weight lifted. "I feel done," she said, "and I feel whole." Another click. Claire lowered her camera and smiled. "Would you be open to a follow-up?" Readers are asking. They want to know how it ends. Marjorie didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to Lydia, who simply raised a brow and said, "Appetite for justice satisfied." Marjorie's lips curled ever so slightly. "I fed him regret." Exactly as promised. They walked to the curb in silence. Claire watched them go, already drafting the next headline in her head. Kyle sat in his kitchen that night, still in the same clothes, sleeves rolled up, a can of cold soup untouched on the counter. The fridge buzzed in the silence. He scrolled through his phone, news articles, trending hashtags, Reddit threads. Number Marjorie Henson was still trending in local circles. One post showed her handing off a quilt to a museum docent. Another was a still from Claire's article, her hands on the courthouse railing, looking out like she'd finally reached shore after a long, brutal swim. Underneath the comments, "She didn't ruin him. He ruined himself. You don't inherit a legacy. You earn it. She taught him with silence." That's the loudest kind of lesson. Kyle slammed the phone down and stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the tile. He opened the cupboard, grabbed a cereal box, dumped it into a bowl with dry, furious motion. No milk. He didn't have any. He stared down at the heap of cornflakes, crunchy, stale, dusty. He ate them anyway, each bite a reminder. Later that night, Marjorie sat on the edge of her bed, unpinning her brooch, placing it back into its velvet box. The house was still. Her hands moved slowly, but without tremble. She had done what needed doing. As she reached for the bedside lamp, her laptop chimed. New email, Claire Nolan. Subject: "Would you give them your ending?" The cursor blinked. A blank reply. An open door. Marjorie stared at the screen for a moment, then turned off the lamp. She'd sleep first. Answers could wait until morning. The diner sat just off Route 66, far from the polished steakhouse where the humiliation began. Here, the light buzzed faintly overhead. The air smelled of hash browns, old coffee, and pancake syrup. A bell chimed every time the front door opened. But nobody turned to stare. Nobody whispered. No one knew her as the woman from the article, and that was the point. Claire slid into the booth first, recorder tucked away in her bag. No interviews today, she promised, grinning. Scout's honor, Lydia followed, setting her oversized tote beside her and ordering coffee before her coat was even off. Marjorie came last, settling into the seat with a quiet grace that made the clink of her spoon in the water glass sound like punctuation. She looked over the laminated menu like it was a novel. They still serve chicken fried steak this late. They do, said Lydia, but only if you've earned it. Marjorie smiled. Then I'll have that with mashed potatoes. Extra gravy, Claire raised a brow. Celebratory meal? No, Marjorie said. A real one. They ordered, and conversation drifted through stories about Claire's editorial deadlines and Lydia's latest battle with her HOA. Marjorie mostly listened. She liked the sound of women speaking freely, women who weren't biting their tongues or waiting to be interrupted. Their food arrived on heavy white plates, steam curling off the surface like fog lifting from a battlefield. Marjorie took her time with the first bite, knife slicing neatly, fork pressing down just right. She chewed slowly, lips closed, posture elegant. Claire watched her with the quiet awe of someone witnessing reclamation. Do you ever regret it? She asked finally, cutting him out. Marjorie didn't answer right away. She wiped her mouth with her napkin, sipped her water. Her gaze didn't flicker. I regret trusting him for too long, she said. But not letting go. Lydia raised her coffee mug in silent toast. To dignity served warm. They clinked glasses gently. Claire leaned forward, elbows on the table. Can I ask one more off-the-record question? Marjorie nodded. What would you tell other women like you, ones who stayed quiet, who gave too much, who are still hoping someone might grow up and apologize? Marjorie folded her hands, the edge of her wedding ring catching the low diner light. Don't wait for them to remember you're a person. Remind them, Claire smiled slowly. That's a quote worth stealing, Lydia snorted. Put it on a mug, and I'll buy 10. They laughed, and for a long moment, it was just 3 women in a booth. No courtrooms, no headlines, no legacy battles. Then, from her purse, Marjorie pulled out a small, aged wallet insert. She laid it on the table face down, then gently turned it over. Richard's photo, faded but still strong. She looked at it for a long while, then passed it toward Claire. He built a life for us with his hands, she said softly. Kyle inherited his jawline, his eyes, but not his spine, not his heart. Claire studied the photo, then passed it back with quiet reverence. Marjorie tucked it back into her purse. I wish I could say the court victory felt triumphant, that it fixed what was broken. But it didn't. It just stopped the bleeding. Lydia nodded slowly. Sometimes that's all the win you get. The server came by with pie menus, but they declined. The meal was over, not rushed, just finished. As they walked out into the dusk, the air was crisp and smelled faintly of rain. Claire paused to pull out her phone, but not to record, just to check the time. I'll leave the story alone for now, she said. But if you ever want to write your own ending, your words, your voice, you have my number. Marjorie nodded, not committing either way. Some endings didn't need harder rewriting. She stepped toward her car, paused, and turned back. He mocked my appetite in public, she said, her voice calm, final. I left him starving in court. Then she opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and drove off, quiet, steady, and full.